past 2 hours about a lot of philosophical material, the why, and now we're getting into the how. Christian pedagogy. Yes, sir.
I did have a question.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm just curious, how you would feel about, based on what you said, the philosophy of what Christian schools should be teaching with the Bible as foundation with the admissions process. If you have a student, the interview with the parents, it's clear, that the parents, well-educated, good, upstanding people, but they're not real Christians. And then their child, who's also polite,
Sure.
good student, but really just doesn't believe at all.
Doesn't believe at all.
Yeah.
Right.
So what should the school's philosophy be on?
There's three types of schools that occur in Christian education. You have covenant schools that are completely to one side, where you have to have pastoral recommendation and at the admissions process, and if you discover that the family is not a member of a church or the student's not a believer, they immediately disqualify them. Then you have the extreme other side of the coin that says we are completely evangelical. We will take anybody and everybody. Doesn't matter what their background, doesn't matter what they believe. If they're coming, it's my opportunity to minister. And then you have this school in the middle that says we're going to be a happy mix of both. And if a parent comes and says we're not believers, we truly believe this is a great school, then you have to pray through and make the decision on whether you're going to take that student into play. The school that I was an administrator at was that middle school. We were a church-based school that was covenant in a lot of ways, but there were those students that, what my pastor and I would always say, we'll roll the dice on and take a chance that the student, you're going to be able to minister to that family. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes the students got saved, and to God be the glory, and things dramatically shifted for that student. I've also had the flip side of the coin where I had to say, for the sake of the ministry as a whole, I'm going to need you to withdraw your student, because of the detriment those kids were bringing to the school. It really just all depends on the mission and the model that the school was started on. But I think for me personally, I would probably fall in that middle line of you really just need to think through, because Christian schools are not for every student, and every Christian school is not for every student. So it really just, how does it all meld together in what the mission and the vision of the school are? Yeah. Okay. Good question. All right. So this was the research that I was given permission to adapt from Doris Kaiser and Jim Parsons, University of Alberta, educational research. Both were doctrinal students when they did this research, became parts of their dissertation. And actually, the funny part was when I called and asked more with Dr. Parsons, he said, "Where did you find my research?" And I told him the journal it was in. He said, I didn't know it had been published. I said, how do you not know it had been published? Well, he had sold it to a clearinghouse, and that clearinghouse had bought the rights to republish. So he didn't even know it had been republished. So he said, "Can you get your hands on that publication and mail me a copy?" I said, "Sure, no problem." And he wanted a copy of the PowerPoint, and he was just ecstatic that somebody was actually, A, reading his research, and 2, found value in it and wanted to present it. But as I read through the research article and began to see how this could fit into this biblical worldview model, it became very apparent that a lot of times we talk about the why. When we talk about the how, we kind of just let it go. Go with God. There's your biblical worldview instruction. Now go to your classroom and figure it out. What does it look like? Is it biblical integration, pulling out the Bible, reading a verse, and then putting the Bible away and getting into your study of y equals mx plus b, slope-intercept form? Or, you read a scripture and then you put it away and you get into your economics discussion about market equilibrium and current trends, or, those kinds of things. Or is it more than that? So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the nuts and bolts of it. When we talk about pedagogy, the first thing we need to do is look at a definition of it on the word pedagogy. The function or work of a teacher. It's the actual work you do, how you do it. That's pedagogy. The art or science of teaching education, instructional methods. One of the things that I liken teaching to is pitching in baseball. A lot of people can throw a baseball. I can throw a baseball. And I play catch with my son. We've got gloves. I can't pitch. Now, I got a good friend of mine, his name's Tommy Phelps. He pitched for the Florida Marlins the year they won the World Series. And he pitched, I think, game 5 of the World Series. I will never stand on the mound like Tommy Phelps did and pitch in a World Series game. And I will never have the opportunity to wear a World Series ring that I earned. I wore his. I just had to put it on. Huge, enormous. But I don't know the finesse side of a fastball or a curveball or a split finger changeup. I don't know the finesse side of it. I know how. I know the mechanics, but I don't know the art side of it. You know, a lot of times when we're in our undergrad studies, if we're studying to be educators, they teach the technical side of it, but the finesse side of it, or the art side of it, comes as you hone your practice. And that's where the knowing how to reach a student in relationship, knowing how to approach a parent for an issue, knowing how to reteach the material for the 45th time because they didn't get it the first 44 times, and be able to pull that other tool out of the toolbox and getting the students to understand. That's where the art side comes in. That's where the pedagogy side comes in. I'll never forget the first day I stood in front of students as a teacher. I was 22 years old. I had written out enough notes for the first week of school, or so I thought. In that first 8th grade American history class, I proceeded to teach 4 days worth of lessons in one 50-minute period. Because I thought the best way to instruct was for them to sit, me to talk, them to write, and everything was great. Right? Well, what I discovered was that I learned that way. So I taught the way I learned. Now, not everybody learns that way. Having 2 children who have some learning differences, and having a 14-year-old that I'm homeschooling who has ADHD, I realize his brain does not work the way mine does. It doesn't. The finesse side of it, drawing on my resources as an educator, is now being put to the test. Because not only is he a student, he's mine. Which also means that if he doesn't do his homework, then there's other types of punishment that can come into play. But it's the art side of it. Students do not learn the way you learn. Don't presume to teach the way you learn because there are students in the classroom that it's going to go right past them and move on. And I learned a very hard lesson that day when I got to the end of the day and I realized, now what do I do? I've taught everything I needed to teach for the week. So then I had to go back and reevaluate. Okay? The art side of teaching. Now, what makes the art or the science of teaching Christian? Teachers teach all the time. Preschool level, college level, corporate level. People who are doing corporate trainings, those are teachers. What makes that teaching Christian? Well, there are 4 basic truths. The first one is this, that it honestly faces life. It honestly faces life. It assesses life critically so as to suggest change when change is needed. Understand that your students fall under the same verse that we fell into, where it says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." Once you move past that, and you realize that even how polite that student is, they are still lost in need of Christ the same way you are. They might be saved and having a bad day just like you do, and things snap. So we understand that we honestly look at it as life. It's not that model that you see in a promo video or a TV show where all of the students file in and they sit in their chairs and they wait for you to stand up and be the sage on the stage and give all of your knowledge to them, and they will receive it and they will do every single homework assignment you ask them to the best of their ability. Is that honest life? No. Because that student had a knockdown drag out with their parent when they walked, before they got out of the car and they got dropped off in car line. and they're thinking about how unjust they were treated. And now you represent the authority figure that they believe wronged them in that car, and you're telling them to sit down and be quiet so you can go over your stuff. Expect real life to occur. Expect it. When we understand that, it changes the way we think. And we suggest change when change is needed. The second thing is that we focus on social justice, and we'll unpack these a little bit here in just a few minutes. It creates equitable opportunities for everyone. Okay, now that doesn't mean that everything is equal. Doesn't mean everything is equal. Equitable and equal are not synonymous. Okay. Is synoptic. Its comprehensive view of life and how it relates all events to God's divine plan. It's encompassing. It's everything we are. And it engages the whole educational experience. You know, I joked with my kids all the time in my AP government class, I could care less what Mr. Connor was teaching across the hall because my class was more important than his. Which is true, because AP government is by nature more important than chemistry and physics. Or at least in my world it was, okay? But understanding that it's the whole educational picture. It's everything working in concert together. It's not teaching in singularity. It's educating as a corporate body. 3 questions you need to ask of your teaching. What am I teaching? What am I teaching? That's the content you've been given to teach. Things that you have to accomplish in your sphere. Why am I teaching this? The application. When I first started teaching economics, I had to really hone in on this particular topic with my students because they didn't understand why they needed to know economic things. Until the first year I taught it, and one of the projects I had with my seniors was to have them work through a budget. They had to figure out what their career was going to be, what their starting salary was going to be, how much had they invested in their education, where were they going to live, what kind of expenses, and I had them work that out for a month. And then at the end of the month, when they were done with their budget, I threw them a curveball, I changed their salary, I moved them to a different location, then they had to redo it, and they turned the project in and we debriefed it, and they said, well, I'm pretty sure this is going to help me in real life. Several months after graduation, one of the students came up to me, I'm still close with him and his family. He came up and said, Mr. Lindquist, I am so glad that you had us do that project. I said, why? He says, because it was real. I lost this job, I had to get this job, I was paying for this, I had a car payment to work into, my insurance. It made the application real. We have to think about how we're going to get our students to apply this to their lives. Some is easier than others to make that application. How am I going to teach this? What methodology? Is this going to be a cooperative learning project? Is this going to be a technology-based project? Is this going to be an old school, take them to a library, teach them how to read out of a book kind of a project? All of these different things. How am I going to achieve my application? So those are the 3 questions we need to ask every single time you're writing a lesson plan. What am I teaching? Why am I teaching? How do I teach it? What, why, and how. Pretty sure we've heard that someplace before. Parsons says this, in all cases, teachers must determine what method and what content should be used effectively to achieve their goals as a means of engaging the entire experience of teaching and learning. So, what does Christian pedagogy look like? What does it look like? Well, first off, there are 7 characteristics that we're going to talk about. The first off is that it is unique. We have a task, we have an opportunity that is unique from any others. We understand that each child is uniquely gifted. Now, I was in a school where there was a level of expectation when I was a classroom teacher. There was a level of expectation of those students to do a task, to sit in a classroom, to be a certain way, to act a certain way, and if that student stepped out of line, then there were repercussions. When I became an administrator, I began to understand, and I was working under somebody else's authority. When I became an administrator, and as I became a father of a student who has a learning difference, it occurred to me that my kid wasn't the only one that was unique. Every single student sitting in my classroom has a specific design put on their lives. And it was my job as an educator to discover that uniqueness and help that student tap into what they were unique with. So that's what made my job just a little bit different. We offer each child dignity because each child is created in God's image. See, that Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, does not just apply to us as adults. It's talking about the students in class. When we understand that and we interact with that student, understanding that that student was made in God's image the same way I was, should change the way you interact. Because they are of just as much value to God as you are. They're not any less. They're of equal value because that love is exactly the same. Recognize and encourage the gifts and abilities. We foster individual and supportive learning environments. Now, you guys are doing a great job here of that particular of these tasks. Okay? Relationship. Relationship, we honed in on at the beginning of the sessions this morning. This is key. We have to actively engage our students to share themselves with others. You've got those students that walk in and they sit by themselves and they don't really interact with anybody else and they move on. We have to show our students that they can interact with other people. If you get down into it and you start building that relationship, those students who you see leaning off by themselves probably are doing it because there was an event in their lives where they felt that they were hurt. And that's their defense mechanism. They don't want to let anybody else in. There's a trust level, a trust factor that has to be rebuilt. Okay? So, we actively engage their students to share themselves with other people. We have to understand and have to help them create healthy boundaries between student and teachers and students. Understanding that there are students that we as teachers are going to gravitate towards. Those are the ones that maybe they get called teacher's pet. But there's also those students that we have to make ourselves lean towards to build that relationship. We have to do what we can to break apart cliques that develop among our student body and to say, you know what, you don't have to be best friends with them, but they're not enemies. My third year of teaching, or my fourth year of teaching, I don't remember which one it was, I had a class of 21 students. 18 of them were girls. Wow. The boys sat in the back of the room and huddled together because they realized their strength in numbers, they can't eat all of us at the same time. But there were 3 very distinct girl cliques in that class. And as I stepped back and watched the interactions, I realized they didn't understand this particular part. So I had to spend the entire year trying to help them through this as well as teach the subjects. And at the end of it, I realized I would much rather have a class of 21 boys than that many girls. You know, guys, when they get angry with each other, they go out, they take care of it, they're friends afterwards. The girls, not so much. Not so much. But at the end of it, once we began to have the family meetings and trying to get through the dramas and the emotions and different things that were running through the class, we realized there needed to be some healthy boundaries. And they were but I was teaching history. But that social interaction was just as important in my class as getting the knowledge across. So helping them to understand that was key. Relationships will help in classroom management and conflict resolution. We touched on that at the beginning. If you have a relationship with a student that's based in mutual trust and respect, you can spend those chips to get to the result in classroom management you want. If you tell a kid to sit down and be quiet, so many times, what are they going to hear the next time you say that? That peanut teacher. Wah, 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 wah. It's not effective anymore. At lunch, you sit down next to that student and you talk on a personal level and realize, you know what, you both like cars, you're into sports, you're talking about video games, you're talking whatever. That kid sees you, that student sees you as a person who hurts, who has dreams, who wants to do something. So the next time that kid in class begins to cut up, you look at him and say, dude, come on. Quit being a knucklehead. They hear it differently because now you've invested some time. One of the things that when I started teaching, because of the size of our school, we as the middle school teachers had to pull lunch duty. So we didn't go to the teacher's lounge and sit by ourselves. We were outside sitting at the tables with the kids because we went inside, got the lunch, and then, went outside and sat in the pavilion and those kinds of things. As the school grew and a fuller lunch staff was hired on and teachers' aides began to pick up those duties, and our principal came to us and said, well, you guys can go over to the lunchroom, teacher's lunchroom, and eat by yourselves if you want. I didn't want to. Because I discovered my classroom management was less because I was building this first. And it made things in the class a whole lot different. So understanding, and also helping them through conflict resolution. And students need to be guided on how to have healthy relationships. Well, I've got 2,000 friends on Facebook. I'm popular. No, not so much. That's really not it. They're so enamored by the screen, they can't have a face-to-face conversation with somebody. They don't know how to make eye contact. They don't know how their posture. They miss all of those nonverbal cues that you and I learned on the playgrounds growing up because we didn't have all of those things. You want to see students interact with each other differently? Put the textbooks aside and pull some board games out and teach them how to play board games. Wow. Economics class. Anybody teach economics in here? No. Monopoly. They begged. They're like, oh, we're going to play Monopoly? What? The next day, like, can we continue our game? And it was the quiet one that took everybody for everything. And everybody's like, Nick! Nick's from Plant City. Nick drives a big truck, hunts and fishes. And like, Nick, we thought you were just redneck. Inside was an economic mind that nobody knew was there. Teach world history, play Risk. World domination. It's always the quiet ones. So pour into the quiet ones, okay? Pour into the quiet ones. As speaking from one that was quiet in school. Healthy relationships. Community. This is where we have to get our students to understand and learn that it's not just about the four walls of the classroom that they're in. That they are a part of a larger group. The idea that they can build and edify individuals that isolated work cannot accomplish. Now, this was a tough pill for me to swallow because I am not a fan, I was not a fan of cooperative learning. I was the kid that when a project was given to a group of people, I did my part and didn't share with anybody else because as long as I was in control of what I needed to do, I didn't have to rely on anybody else. And they usually would fall down on the job and I would have to pick up the slack. So as a teacher, I realized cooperative learning didn't work, right? Wrong. It does work. It has to be programmed properly, but it does work. You go into an office scenario today, the corporations that your students are going to be walking into, you're not going to see the cube farms of old, not individual offices. They're going to be rooms that look like this, that have these kinds of tables, where they're facing each other. It's collaborative working. Matter of fact, if you go to some of those Fortune 500 companies, they've done away with offices and there's couches throughout the common space. And they're not working at tables, they're working on tablets, sitting on the couch, and they're collaborating with each other. But yet we educate our kids in isolation for a world that's expecting them to be able to act cooperatively. Now, more importantly than just the life skill that we're teaching our students, when we educate them in isolation, when we're telling them to go out and share the gospel, are we sending them mixed messages? Because we're not teaching them that we need to build outside and build a community to edify. To understand that we have a shared purpose. A shared purpose. One of the things towards the very end of my 10 years principal, I took our school philosophy and motto and made posters and put it at the front of every single classroom. It changed two things. One, it changed the way the teachers viewed themselves, because they understood that everybody was working towards the same goal. Now, they said it in verbiage, and when you asked them, they understood. But when it was right there in front of the teacher every single day, what the vision and mission of the school were, then they began to act that way. So the teachers began to act in what we call unit cohesion, to pull the military term out. But the students were seeing it as well. And don't you know that if you stepped outside the mission and the vision of the school, they would remind you. That's not what we're, but what were they doing? They were seeing it every day, making ownership of it, understanding that it was a shared purpose. It was a shared purpose. That we understand you need to care for others. That we take seriously preferential option for the less fortunate and vulnerable among us. That was simple as we had a crisis pregnancy center down the road from the school. And once a year we did a diaper drive for them. And we brought in more diapers than they knew what to do with. We, our National Honor Society, decided that they needed to step out because there was not a food pantry in our area of the neighborhoods. So our National Honor Society opened up a food pantry. They desired to go outside of the school walls and go into Tampa and work at Metropolitan Ministries and work at the Dream Center and go to Feeding America. And it opened their eyes to see that there was more out there than just the four walls of the school. They got excited when we started putting together the Operation Christmas Child shoe boxes through Samaritan's Purse. And we gave them the opportunity to pray over those boxes before those boxes left the campus. We provided meals for families that were inside our school. When a need would come up, I'd go to the kids and say, you know what, we've got a need. We've had a family that's come to us and they're in trouble. What do you guys want to do? How can we help? Can we make a box of food for them? Let's go over to the food pantry. Let's put things together. Can we go help them move? Can we go do yard work? Understanding that they were getting outside themselves. That is the key. And in today's climate, that's teaching a culture of me, I, we have to be intentional about moving them away from the I and moving towards it's an us. And I've been given that commandment in Matthew 28. Go ye therefore into all the world. That's the goal. And in my class. That's my desires. Agency. Number 4. Teach students that their actions will impact the world. They believe that there is no other impact in and of themselves. What I choose to do is just on me, not anybody else. Not anybody else. That's a fatal flaw. The belief that students will impact the world while others have nothing to offer. Have you ever taught a student that says in a conversation to you, I just don't know what I'm good at, and I'm not really good at anything, so I don't have anything I really need to offer anybody? Well, if the student believes that, are they taking away that I was made with distinction comment from Genesis 1:26? Let us make man in our image. So if a student begins to devalue himself, or by our actions, and I'll take ownership of this because I was guilty of it, putting value on one student more than the other, then am I perpetuating this thought? For years, we had in our school, while I was an instructor, while I was a teacher, we had 2 tracks. We had the advanced track and we had the honors track. The honors track was the grade level I have in math and science. The advanced track was grade level, but we were still about 3.5 months ahead of what the public schools were doing. So we call it advanced. I had 2 classes, American history classes. Now, because of the schedule that we had to have for the maths and the sciences, we had to keep the students separated into their academic levels for English and history. The interesting dynamic occurred when the students came in that were in the advanced class. They believed they were not good enough because they were not in the honors class. But do you know who did exceedingly better on their written assignments? The advanced class did. Because what they discovered was they may not be good in math and science, but they were really good in history and English. So I started calling them. I said, well, they're my honors history class. They're my advanced history class. Well, they're the honors class. Well, yeah, for math and science. Because I had a girl, perfect example. I had a student that was in my honors class, student in my advanced class. Gave the same project. Student in my advanced class said, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this, and we're going to do this, and it's going to be fantastic. I said, that's a great job. Student in my honors class gave out the assignment. She raised her hand. Mr. Lindquist, what do you want from us? I said, it's right there in front of you. She says, no, I need to know exactly what you expect me to do. Ah. So you're going to do what I expect, and therefore that's going to give you your value. Now, I didn't tell her that right out, but that was her mind. We have to get our students to understand that they are unique. And that though they may not be able to throw a 94-mile-an-hour fastball, they still have value. And they can still do something that nobody else can. I had a student she struggled in her math. She struggled in science. She struggled in English. She was okay in history. She can draw like nobody's business. She ran into a little bit of trouble. Hasbro contacted her and said, your artwork looks a little much too like ours on your My Little Pony drawings, so you're going to need to back off on that. But some of the other things that she was doing, amazing, amazing work. So what is she doing? Graphic design. Oh, I'll never be a good student. Oh, I'll never do it. Yeah, you may not be, organic chemistry is not going to be your major. But you do have value. That's what Christian pedagogy is all about. Getting them past that fatal flaw. That fatal flaw is, again, turn the TV on. It's being sold to our students. Look this way, be this way, act this way, and you can be better. They're playing on those thoughts and feelings in the students' minds. Directly impact the motivation and dedication of the student positively or negatively. Because you can get a student to do one of 2 things. You can get them to do it because of the negative consequences that will fall on not doing the assignment, or you can get the student to do it positively because of the internal gratification or the intrinsic motivation that may come from that. Either way, you can get to the task. It's just a matter of, do you want it good or do you want it bad? All students need to believe that they will impact the world powerfully. They want to know that they've got something in them that's going to make them different, that's going to set them apart. That's where our school's mission and vision statements play in. Once I started reading this research and getting this in, I had to go back and revise and revamp our school's mission and vision because I realized it was a little dated. It wasn't as pointed as it needed to be. And that's what drove to the posters that were all over the classrooms. Stewardship. A holistic, responsible relationship with the world. Now, if you were to hear that and nothing else, it sounds like we're going to go, hug a tree and all those kinds of things. But understanding that 128 part, you have dominion over the world, be a good steward of it. We have to teach our students that. With their actions, with their attitudes. What are they going to be stewards of? Their time, their talents, those kinds of things. Because a lot of students don't see their ability as students as something they need to be a steward of. Go into your classrooms when your students come back on the 24th, start talking about educational stewardship. Well, I know we talk about tithe and talents and all the time and all. I mean, educational stewardship. Teaching as though the existence of harmony between the content and God's nature and creation. Bringing them together. Helping them to understand the bigger picture. This is where the diversity and the unique aptitudes and skills to education are going to come. This is where the, Mr. Lindquist, what if? I love my kids' what if questions. Because it told me they were thinking about the product in their own way and would come to it. Some of the what ifs were a little bit off the wall. We were talking about Roanoke Colony disappearing in 8th grade. And a kid named Bobby raises his hand. Mr. Lindquist, what if aliens came and abducted them? I don't know, Bobby. What if aliens did come and abduct them? He said, that would have been weird. I said, well, any weirder than a group of Indians coming up and not having ever seen an Indian before and being taken captive? He's like, I didn't think of it that way. Maybe the aliens were Indians. Then he starts processing it. Okay, so then I understood his what if question was driving his brain into the way he needed to think. Okay? The uniqueness, the diversity. If I had said, Bobby, that is absolutely ridiculous, be quiet, put your hand down, and move on, would Bobby have ever responded to anything else in the class? Nope. Why? Because he would have thought the fatal flaw was actually accurate. I have nothing of value to offer Mr. Lindquist in his class today, so I'm just going to be quiet. Okay? We have to understand it. We have to invite that. We have to push our students towards that. Service. Micah 6:8, my life verse. It's on several places in my office. It was on a banner that hung across the front of my classroom. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Anybody know the first part of that verse? This is the whole duty. This is what God requires of a man. Goes into Ecclesiastes where he said this is the whole duty of man, to love God and keep his commandments. It all comes together. This is what our students need to be doing, and we need to drive them to that. Educational service instead of vocation. Enacting God's will through the classroom and instruction instead of focusing on what you can't accomplish by yourself. Circle this right here. This is for you. That's for you. Now, from you, it'll get to your students, but this is for you. Understanding that educational service rather than vocation. Vocation means it's a job that I studied for, and I do it, and at the end of the day, I walk home and I leave it there. You guys work in the classroom, and then you go home, and what do? You probably work some more, don't you? Yeah. It's not a vocation. It's a calling. You realize that you've reached that pinnacle when you're walking through a store and you see something, you think, wow, that would be great in my classroom. You know, that's when you have achieved the level of crazy teacher. Because everything you see, you automatically put into the context of, I could really do this in my classroom. Why else would my wife have a Pinterest board of nothing but music classroom ideas? Okay? Yes, my wife's a teacher also, so when we get together, what do? We talk shop. You know, it's what we do. Gives to others for the sake of themselves and fulfillment of their relationship with God. It's not because of the paycheck. You could get a paycheck, a bigger paycheck, somewhere else, doing less intense work. We had a teacher at school, her husband owned a seafood distribution company. And she'd come into my classroom and she said, how you doing today? I said, Chris, is your husband looking for anybody to pack shrimp? Because today's the day I think I'd pack shrimp. Because it requires nothing. But then at the end of the day, you've got that one kid that was the bright spot, and then you realize, I'm coming back tomorrow. I'm coming back tomorrow. Because of the sake of fulfillment of others. And edification. Let all things be done for edification. This is the synthesis of human actions towards building rather than destroying. The composite of unique gifts and abilities for the sake of the perfect will of God. This goes into that passage where it talks about if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of smell be? If the whole body were a foot, where would the sense of hearing be? I can't teach physics, but I know a guy. He can't teach AP government, but he knows a guy. I read voraciously, but I can't teach literature. And Lord knows I can't stand grammar. I apologize. Sorry. English teachers. But I know a woman that can do it, and she loves it. I had to take her off my Facebook page because she kept grammatically editing all my posts. Okay? So, but we know people. Well, why? Because we are composed of unique gifts and abilities for the sake of the perfect will of God. If we get our students in our classrooms to get this and understand that each one of them is uniquely wired for what God has for them to do, that changes the way they look at things. There was a point in my career where I thought real seriously about leaving my Christian school and going to work in the county. I was praying through it, and my wife one night at dinner looked at me and she said, "You could do it." I said, "Yes, I can." She says, "But would you be happy?" No, I wouldn't. Because she understood I can't teach history without God. And I would get myself fired. First day, 20 minutes in, I would probably get myself fired because I can't do it. Because it's who I am. It's everything I am. I can't teach economics without talking about God's economy. I can't teach government without Romans chapter 13. I can't teach world history without Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. I can't do it. Because I was designed specifically for my task. You were designed specifically for your task. The kids were designed and are designed specifically for their task. If our acts do not foster this, we need to question our work. I had a teacher that taught next to me for years. And one day he came into my classroom after school, and I could tell he was just, his countenance had fallen, and I said, "Rick, what's wrong?" And he says, "It's just, kids are irritating me today." I said, "Okay." We talked, and a week later, same conversation. A week later, same conversation. A week later, same conversation. Around about March, I finally got tired of him coming into my classroom and complaining. I looked at him and I said, "You probably need to find something else to do." He was offended. "What do you mean? You're not happy?" He says, "Well, you get frustrated too." I said, "Yeah, I get frustrated. But at the end of the day, I realize that it's not just what I'm doing is for me. It's for the kingdom." I said, "Rick, have you forgotten that?" The conversation ended there, and he didn't re-sign a contract at the end of the year. He went on to other things. And I ran into him about 2 years after that, and I said, "Rick, how are you doing?" He says, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" He said, "Because I was miserable. And you were the only one that pointed out to me that I needed to question why I was doing it. Because it caused me to refocus and realize that God had wired me for something, and teaching was not it. And teaching was not it." We have to understand that at times we have to question, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And it may just be because we need to be reminded of the desire, the passion, the reason that we got into education. Or it may mean that we need to chisel a sharp edge off of how we're doing things, because that edge is just not working. And we refocus, and we come into a different way of doing it. We believe Christian pedagogy should include enjoyment in its focus while being restorative, hospitable, transformative, and based on edifying classroom relationship and conversations. It encompasses everything. That's what pedagogy does. It's the whole picture. It's the whole picture. Restructuring definition of learning. We have current issues that we have to walk through, things that we can't just stick our head in the sand and say, it's going to get better. I have news for you. I've read the end of the book. It doesn't get better before God comes back. Sorry. It's not going to get any better. Matter of fact, it's going to become more difficult for us as Christians and as educators. It's going to become more difficult. We have too little critique of learning styles we have created. We don't look and say, how can I do it better? One of my pet peeves that I had as an administrator, my teachers would come, and at the end of the year, we still had paper grade books because I had a staff that was not technologically innovative, so they didn't like lesson plans on a computer, so they still had their paper grade books. At the beginning of the year, they would always come to me and say, Steve, can I have my lesson plans for last year? Why? I just want to see what I did last year. Okay, but if I start seeing photocopies of the same things that you've done for the past 10 years, know that I'm throwing your lesson plan books away next year because you need to do something different. Content. They were not willing to critique what they were doing, how they were doing it, to make it better. To make it better. You know, I did this, but I think I could do it better next time. Or I did this today, maybe I'll try this tomorrow. We use a system that's based on logic of a consumer and a consuming culture. Your students are going to walk in, they're going to sit down, and they're going to cross their arms inside their minds and say, teach me, I dare you. Or they come in and they sit down and, how am I going to be entertained today? Because they want the song and dance. They want the flash. They want the pop. They want the pizzazz. They want what they see on TV and they expect it in the classroom. And too many times we step into that and we cater to that consumer model of our students to their detriment, and we bring our level of education down just a few notches. We run into a desire to learn. Do students really want to learn? I mean, honestly, do they really want to learn? Some do. Some can care less. Some can care less. The more I know, the more I can earn. The more I can earn, the more I can consume. The more I consume, the more powerful I appear to be. The more power I wield, real or perceived, the more influence I have. Why are our students taking advanced classes to get into the better colleges, to get the higher degrees, to earn the bigger paychecks, to buy the bigger house, to get the better options, because that in their mind is the end goal. This is the culture we're in. It's the American dream. But is that truly God's dream? So we have to really take that into consideration. And we have to get our students from this back down to, let us make man in our image. And bring them back to that biblical worldview. And focus them in on that. And rebuild and restore. We have to have a radical shift. Because what we're doing doesn't always work. Our focal point is Christ. The minute you forget that, hand Susan your keys and walk out the door. Tell Eddie and Claire I got to go somewhere else. Because that is the focal point. That's it. Nothing else. Redemption and kinship in our kindness and hospitality towards students. Have a conversation with that student when they're going through a discipline issue that always ends with redemption. Walk them through the restoration process. Correction and rebuke and reproof are biblical. And too many times as teachers, we leave it at just that. And the relationship is never restored. That has got to be as much a part as the reproof is the restoration. We need to have that. Move from sit down and be quiet so I can tell you what I know. We've got to move past that. And the last one, we need to focus our task on one of service and understand the requirement. Doing, not just knowing Christ's work. Actually doing it. Living it out in front of our kids. When you take your kids on a service project, you're going with the mindset and model that you are going to serve alongside them. Not you're going to stand at the back of the room and watch them serve the population. but that you are engaged as well. Now, is that the end of it? It's not. It's not. Because now comes the part where you have to figure out, what does it look like in my classroom? What does it look like for me personally? How do I do what we've learned today? Or how do I do what I've already known, but now I just need to revise it? That's where that paper part comes into it. Because now is the opportunity where you get to sit on those down times, right? When you have nothing else going on, to think through the why and the how, and to synthesize it so that you can put it forward into your personal philosophy of education, your personal Christian philosophy of education. That's the hard part. Because I can't tell you what yours is to be. God made you unique. He designed you for a purpose. You know that purpose. He knows that purpose. Now you have to word it out and develop it into your manifesto, into your creed, into your motto, and implement it in the classroom.